Adeline Merrick could no longer see the needle she had threaded blind for 20 years. Noon light through a St. Louis window, a wedding dress held up to it, and still she found the seam by touch, not sight. She did not weep. She sat back down and wrote her letter anyway, in a hand she could no longer read back to herself. The boarding house matron had a line for it. "A woman going blind is a woman going on to the county, Miss Merrick." 10 months of letters went west to a Colorado rancher. In every one of them, one lie of omission. And 900 miles away, that rancher laid 10 letters side by side on his table and saw what she never wrote: the lines running downhill, the loops falling open, the blot where the pen was held too long. He understood. What he did about it is the whole of this story. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go on, do something small for me. Subscribe, and in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. St. Louis, the spring of 1887. Adeline Merrick was 34 years old, and she had sewn since she was a girl of 9. Her mother had put a needle in her hand before she put a Bible in it. She could set a sleeve without a pin. She could hem a mile of skirt and never look down. That was the trade. That was her whole life. And her whole life was leaving her, 1 degree at a time. It had started as a smudge, a softness at the edge of things, the way a window fogs on a cold morning. She had rubbed her eyes and blamed the lamp oil. Then the smudge stopped clearing. By that spring, the middle of the world had gone milky too. She could see a shape move across a room. She could not see the face it carried. A doctor on Olive Street had looked into her eyes with a little mirror and used a long word. Cataract. He said there was a knife for it, but the knife was a gamble. And the gamble cost more than she would earn in a year. He said, kindly, that she should prepare herself. Prepare herself. As though a woman could fold up her own eyes and put them in a drawer. She did not tell the shop. She could not. The shop kept her because her hands were fast and true, and the day they learned her eyes were failing was the day they let her go. So she learned to work by feel, the way a person learns a dark house. She counted stitches instead of watching them. She kept her thread trimmed short, so a knot would tell her where the end was. She held a finished seam to the light out of habit, though the light no longer told her a thing. The other girls thought her only tired. She let them think it. It was the matron who forced her hand. The boarding house on Chestnut took in working women, and the matron watched them the way a hawk watches a hedge. She had seen Adeline miss the top stair twice. She had seen her grope for the door latch. And she had a mouth on her. "A woman going blind is a woman going on to the county, Miss Merrick," she said one evening, not unkindly, which was worse. "I run a respectable house. I can't have the county coming to my door to collect a body that can't pay its way." The county. The poorhouse. Adeline knew what those 2 words meant to a woman alone. It meant a cot in a long gray room. It meant handing over your name at the door and getting a number back. It meant that everything she had built with her 2 hands would end in a place where hands did not matter at all. That night, she found the newspaper. A girl in the next room read the matrimonial notices aloud for sport, laughing at the lonely men who advertised themselves like livestock. Adeline did not laugh. She sat very still and listened to one of them twice. A widower. A cattle rancher near a town called Longmere, on the Front Range of Colorado. 41 years old, the notice said, of steady habits, seeking a wife who could keep a house and was not afraid of hard country or a quiet man. It gave a name, Silas Warrick, and Adeline, who could no longer see the print, had the girl read it a 3rd time, until she had the whole of it by heart. She wrote to him the next morning. Here is the thing you must understand about that first letter. She could barely see the page she was writing on. The paper was a pale field, and the ink was a darker gray, and her own hand moved across it from memory of where letters go. And yet that first letter was beautiful. A fine copperplate hand, the kind the nuns had beaten into her at 8 years old. Every loop even, every line true. She wrote it slow. She wrote it by the shape her hand remembered, not by anything her eye could confirm. And what she wrote was honest. That was the strange part. She told him the truth about nearly everything. She told him she was a seamstress, that she had no family living, that she was not a girl and would not pretend to be one. She told him she could keep a clean house and a careful ledger, and that she was not afraid of work. She told him she did not expect romance and would not demand it, but that she would be loyal, and she would be honest, and she would earn her place. Honest about everything except the one thing, and even the one thing was there, if you knew how to read it. Near the end of that first letter, she wrote a line and thought nothing of it. She wrote that she sewed best by feel now. Having done it so long, her hands knew the work better than her eyes. She meant it as a small boast, a thing a proud woman says about her craft. She threw it away on the page and moved on to the weather. She did not know she had just set the truth down in plain ink and walked past it. She sealed the letter. She could not read the address she had written, so she asked the girl to check it, and the girl said it was fine, and Adeline mailed 900 miles of her life west on the strength of a stranger's glance. Then she waited. The letters crossed the plains all that year. His came back plain and slow. Silas Warrick was not a man who wasted words. He wrote about the land. He wrote about the cattle, and the grass, and the water, and the winter that had killed a third of the herd 2 years back and taught him to hate a warm December. He wrote short sentences that sat square on the page. And he wrote, once, a thing that surprised her. He wrote that a house with only one voice in it grows strange, and that a man can forget the sound of his own name if no one says it for long enough. She read that line with a magnifying glass she had bought for a dime, holding it an inch from the paper, one word at a time, an hour to read a page. And she kept the glass hidden in her sewing basket where no one would find it. What she did not know, what she could not see across all those miles, was what Silas did with her letters when they came. He kept them, every one. He tied them in a length of blue ribbon and set the bundle on the mantel over the stone fireplace. That mantel had a history. For a long time it had held his first wife's things: Caroline's hair combs, a little glass bird she had loved, the daguerreotype of the two of them stiff and young on their wedding day. Caroline had been gone 3 years. And slowly, without quite deciding to, Silas had moved her things to a drawer and set Adeline's ribboned letters where they had been. He did not think about what that meant. He only knew the mantel had looked empty, and now it did not. He read each letter more than once. He was a slow reader by choice, a man who liked to be sure. And somewhere around the fourth letter, he noticed something that made him set the page down and look at it a long while by the lamp. The lines ran downhill. Her first letters had marched straight across the page, edge to edge, level as a fence rail. But this one, letter 4, tilted. The lines started true at the left and drifted down toward the right, the way a road sags toward a ditch. And one loop, on a lowercase e, had fallen open. Where before every letter had closed on itself, clean, now the e gaped like a small mouth. It was a little thing. Most men would not have seen it. Silas Warrick saw everything and said almost nothing, and that was both his gift and the trouble with him. He noticed. He did not write to her about it. He folded letter 4 back into its envelope and tied it with the others, and sat by the fire a while, thinking, in the way of a man turning a stone over in his hand to feel all its sides. Because Silas had seen a sense fail before. Caroline had gone deaf in her last 2 years, not from age, from a fever that took her hearing before it took the rest of her. And Silas had watched her world go silent by degrees, watched her learn to read his mouth, watched her flinch when a door slammed that she could feel but not hear. He had built things for her, without ever saying he was building them. a board on the porch step that thumped hollow so she'd feel the tread of someone coming. A way of tapping the table twice before he spoke so she'd turn and see his face. He had made a house speak to a woman who could not hear it. He had never once told her that was what he was doing, because to name it was to make her owe him, and she was proud, and he loved her pride more than he loved being thanked. So Silas Warrick knew, better than most men living, how a person hides a failing sense. And he began to read Adeline's letters the way a doctor reads a chart. But that came later. In that year, on the page, they were only two lonely people writing across a distance, and the ink was carrying more than either of them said. Then, one afternoon in the early summer, a writer came out to the Warrick place, and the arrangement grew a clock. His name was Merritt Bond, and he was the agent of the Longmere Stockmen's Trust. He rode a good horse and wore a good coat, and he carried a leather folder the way a preacher carries a Bible, like it held the only truth that mattered. He was not a cruel man. He was worse in a quiet way. He was a man who measured a household by its books and believed the measure was the whole of it. He sat his horse in Silas's yard and did not get down. "Mr. Warrick," he said, "about the note." The note was $640. Silas had borrowed it 2 winters back, in the bad year, to buy feed and hold the herd together through the killing cold. He had been paying it down. But the trust had changed hands, and the new men wanted their books tidy, and Bond had come to tell him the note would come due, in full, inside 90 days. 90 days. Silas felt the number land in his chest and kept his face still. "A lot of papers being called this season," Bond said. "Easy, looking around at the ranch as though pricing it. The trust prefers a settled operation. A married place. A running household with 2 hands keeping it. A lone widower on a mortgaged section." He let the sentence hang, unfinished, which was his way. The books read thin, is all I'm saying. A married man reads steadier. He tipped his hat and rode off, and left the 90 days sitting in the yard like a dropped tool. Silas stood there a while. Then he went inside and looked at the bundle of letters on the mantel, and he did not, in that moment, think of them as a way to save his land. That is important. He would not want you to think it. He thought of them as the only honest voice that had come into his silent house in 3 years. But he was not a fool either, and he knew what a married place meant to the trust, and he knew he had 90 days. The letters between them turned, after that, toward a plainer question, not whether, but when. And in the letters that came that late summer and fall, the ink kept telling on her. Letter 7 arrived, and the loops had all come open now, not just the E, the A, the O, the G. Every closed shape in her hand had loosened, as though the pen had grown too heavy to bring all the way around, and the lines did not just run downhill anymore. They wandered. They found the bottom of the page too soon and crowded there. Letter 9 came, and there was a blot. A dark, spreading blot in the middle of a word, the kind a pen makes when it is set to paper and held there, unmoving, too long, as though the writer had lost the place. As though she had stopped, mid-word, to find with her fingers where the line was, and the ink had pooled and betrayed her while she felt for her bearings. Silas looked at that blot by the lamp for a long time. And when the last letter came before the wedding was fixed, letter 10, there was a word dropped clean out of a sentence, and then written back in above the line, crammed small into the space, in a hand that had grown so uneven it hardly matched the copperplate of a year before. She had left a word out, felt the gap somehow, and gone back to fit it in where it did not belong. 10 letters. Silas Warrick laid them out on his table one night in a row, from the first to the last, and he read them not for their words, but for their hands. Copperplate to ruin. Level lines to downhill drift. Closed loops to open ones. Clean pages to the blot and the crammed, dropped word. And he saw, laid out in ink across 10 months, a thing she had never once put into a sentence. He understood what was wrong with her, and what he did with that understanding, That comes soon. For now, the fare was sent. A wedding was fixed. And Adeline Merrick packed one carpet bag and left the boarding house on Chestnut without saying goodbye to the matron, and got on a train going west into a country she had never seen and could not have seen even if she had. The train ride was 3 days of noise and dark. She sat by the window out of habit, though the window gave her nothing but a moving gray. She practiced. That is the thing you must know about Adeline. She sat on that train and practiced arriving. In his letters, Silas had described the Longmere depot to her. A small thing, he'd written. 1 platform. The station house on the left as you step down. 3 steps down from the car to the boards. She had asked him for it plainly, said she liked to know a place before she came to it, and he had drawn it in words without ever asking why. She held that platform in her head. 3 steps down. Station house on the left. She rehearsed it until she could have walked it in a dream, because she knew she would have to walk it nearly blind, in front of strangers, on the most important morning of her life. And under the rehearsing sat the fear. The old fear, the matron's fear, riding west with her, that the moment he saw her fumble, the moment he understood, he would put her right back on the train. That she was a fraud, that she had bought a husband with a lie, and the lie was about to be paid for. She was certain of it. She had been certain of it for 10 months. She had told him everything except the one thing, and she was sure the one thing undid all the rest. The train slowed. A man called out a name that sounded like Longmere. Adeline stood and gripped the seatbacks and made her way to the car door with her carpet bag and felt the cold, high air of Colorado come up to meet her. 3 steps down. She found the first with her foot, the second, the third. She stepped onto the boards of the platform, and she straightened, and she turned to where the station house should be, and she reached out her hand for the rail she remembered him mentioning. And a hand took hers. It was exactly where she had guessed it would be. Exactly. As though the man had stood where the rail should be, and put his own hand in its place, so that a woman reaching for a rail would find him instead, and never have to search. She did not know that was what he had done. She only knew that her hand had gone out into the empty and come back full. "Miss Merrick," said a low voice. "I'm Warrick." "Mr. Warrick," she said. Her voice held. She was proud of that later. Her voice held. There were other people on that platform. Neighbor women, mostly, come to see the rancher's mail-order bride the way people come to see any new thing in a small place. And what they saw, they talked about after. They saw a bride who would not quite meet an eye, who looked a little past a person's shoulder when they spoke to her, who let her new husband guide her by the hand across a flat platform any sighted woman could cross alone. They did not know what they were seeing. They made of it what small towns make of anything. Shy, some said. Proud, said others. Stuck up, said one. A city woman come out here thinking herself above us. Adeline felt their looks like heat on her skin. She could not see their faces. She could feel them staring. And she was certain, standing there with her hand in a stranger's hand, that she had deceived this man and would be sent back on the next train through. She could not have known what Silas Warrick was thinking as he closed his hand around hers and felt how she had aimed it. She could not have known that he had positioned himself on purpose, the way he had once thumped a hollow board for a woman who could not hear. She could not have known that behind his still face he was thinking a thing he would never say aloud to her, though he said it once to himself, and it was this: "A fine hand only tells you the light was good." Hers told me what she'd never say. He put her carpet bag in the wagon. He handed her up to the seat, his hand steady under her elbow, guiding without seeming to guide. And he drove her out of the town of Longmere and up toward the Front Range, where the ranch sat against the foothills. And neither of them said much, because neither of them was a person who said much, and the silence between them was not an empty silence. It was a silence with a great deal inside it. The ranch, when they came to it, was a low house of stone and timber with a barn behind, and the mountains standing up gray-blue past the fences. Adeline saw it as shapes and light. A dark mass that was the house. A paler ground. The great looming dark that was the mountains, which she could feel more than see, a weight against the sky. And when she came into the house, something happened that she did not understand for a long time. The house fit her. She could not have said how at first. She only knew that she moved through it easier than she had moved through any room in years. The kitchen shelf, when she reached for it, held every tin and canister at one height, in a row, so that a hand sweeping along could find the flour and the salt and the coffee without a single one set higher than the rest to be knocked down. The stove sat square in its corner, where a hand would find it in the dark, no chair or table crowding it, its edge always exactly where you'd reach. And on the stairs, when she went up that first evening, her hand slid along the rope rail that ran up the wall, and her fingers found, at the turn where the stairs bent, a knot. A single knot tied in the rope. Right at the place where a person climbing blind would need to know the turn was coming. She stopped, that first night, with her fingers on the knot. And she thought, what a tidy man, what a careful, particular man, to keep a house so ordered, to tie a knot in a rope so it wouldn't fray at the turn. She read his kindness as habit. She read the mercy as a bachelor's fussiness. She did not understand that every one of those things had been made for her, and made before she came, by a man who knew what she needed and would rather cut off his own hand than tell her he knew. She read it wrong. And because she read it wrong, she kept her secret and went on being certain she was a fraud in a house too good for her. The days turned into a first week, and then a second. And Adeline began to do what she had come to do, which was earn her place, because she did not know how to live any other way. The books were the first thing. Silas kept his ranch accounts in a ledger, and he kept them badly, in the way of a man who would rather mend a fence than add a column. He mentioned, one evening, that he was behind on the figures and dreaded the reckoning. And Adeline said she would keep them for him. He said she needn't. She said she would like to. Here is how she did it, and it is a marvel, and the hired boy who saw it never forgot it. She could not read the ledger. But she asked Silas to read her the figures, once each entry, the date and the sum and the reason. And she held them. Every one. She had held stitches in her head for years, thousands of them, a whole garment counted and kept, and numbers were easier than stitches. She built the accounts inside her mind, room by room, and when a figure was needed she gave it back exact, the price of feed in October, the sum owed to the smith, the tally of the fall calves sold, and what each brought. She kept the whole ranch's money in her head, and she never once looked at the page. The hired boy, a lanky fellow named Tom, who could barely cipher his own wages, watched her recite the season back from nothing and said, "How in the world do you hold all that, ma'am?" And Adeline said, "I've held worse in worse light." She did not know how near she came, saying it, to telling him everything. Silas, across the room, heard it too. He did not look up from the harness he was mending, but his hands went still on the leather for just a moment, and then went on. The second thing was the calving shed, and that was the night the ranch first understood who had come to live among them. It was late in the season, a cold black night with no moon, and a cow was down in the far shed, laboring badly, and something was wrong with the calf. Silas and Tom were out there with a lantern, and the lantern was doing them no good, because the cow had wedged herself into the dark corner of the shed, and the light threw shadows that hid more than they showed. The men could not see how the calf lay. They could not tell if it was turned. And the cow was failing, and the calf inside her was failing, and the two men with their good eyes and their one lantern were losing them both. Adeline came out to the shed with a shawl over her nightdress. She had heard the commotion. She stood in the doorway and she did not look at the scene, because looking gave her nothing. She listened. "Let me," she said. Silas looked at her. Tom laughed, not meanly, just a boy's startled laugh. "Ma'am, you can't see a thing in here, it's black as. None of you can see either." Adeline said, "You're worse off than me. You keep waiting on that lantern to tell you something it can't." And she knelt down in the straw and the mess in the dark, and she put her hands where the men would not, and she found the calf by breath, and by heat, and by the shape her fingers read. She had spent 20 years learning a whole world through her hands. A cow in the dark was only another kind of seam. She felt how the calf was turned. She felt the leg folded back that was hanging it up. And she talked low and steady while she worked, the way she'd talk to a frightened thing, and she brought the leg forward, and she felt the great shift as the calf came round to where it belonged. The calf lived. The cow lived. And the two men stood there in the ruined lantern light and watched a nearly blind woman do in the dark what their eyes could not do in the light. And neither of them ever forgot it, and Tom told it in Longmere for years after, though he never once said the word blind, because he did not yet know it, and only said, "She works in the dark like it's noon to her." Silas said nothing at all. He walked her back to the house with his hand under her elbow. And at the door he stopped, and for a moment it seemed he might speak, might finally say the thing that sat between them. He didn't. He said only, "Thank you." And he went to see to the herd. And Adeline lay awake that night, certain, still, that she was a fraud who had married under false colors, certain that any morning now the man would understand what she was hiding and put her out. She did not know that he had understood before she ever stepped down onto that platform. She did not know that 10 of her own letters lay tied in blue ribbon on the mantel below her, or that a man had read her ruin in the ink months ago and sent for her because of it, not despite it, and told no one, least of all her. She lay in the dark that fit her too well, and she felt for the edge of the bed that was exactly where a hand would find it, and she thought, again, what a tidy man. She was still writing letters, you know. That was the strangest thing of all. To no one now. Out of habit. Out of 20 years of an evening hand. She would sit at the little table when the house was quiet and move a pen across a page she could not see, forming words out of memory, saying things to no address. The hand had gone so far now that even she could not read it back. And still she wrote, because the writing was the last thing her hands did that felt like herself. She did not know that downstairs, on a cold night not long before her train, her husband had laid all her old letters in a row and read the truth she'd hidden in every downhill line. She did not know that he knew. But he did. The weeks that followed had a rhythm to them, and Adeline set that rhythm herself. She did not mean to. It happened the way weather happens. One morning she moved the salt from the high shelf to the low one because the high one made her stretch and guess, and the low one she could reach without her fingers hunting. And Tom, the hired boy, came in for his dinner and found the salt where his own hand fell, and thought nothing of it, and used it, and put it back. That was the start. By the end of the month, the whole kitchen answered to her. The flour bin sat square under the window. The knives lived point down in a jar, so no blade waited edge up for a careless hand. The kettle had its one place on the stove, and never left it. And the strange thing, the thing Tom did notice, was that the house ran cleaner now than it ever had. Not tidier. Cleaner. Nothing got lost. Nothing got left half done in a corner to rot. "You've cured him," Tom said one afternoon, meaning Silas, meaning the years of a widower's slow disorder. Adeline laughed. "I've only put things where they'll be found." "He never could find a thing," Tom said. "Lost his own hat off his own head. Some days," and she smiled, and did not tell him that a house where everything is always found is a house built by a woman who cannot see to look for it. She let him think it was tidiness. She let everyone think it was tidiness. She kept the books too. That was the part that still made Tom's eyes go wide. She'd have Silas read her the figures once, just once, of an evening. The price of the beef, the cost of the feed, the tally of the calves. And she'd hold them. All of them. A season's worth of numbers stacked in her head like folded linen. When Tom asked her, testing, what they'd paid for the wire in April, she'd tell him to the dime, and she'd never have seen the page it was written on. "How do you keep it all?" he asked. "I've kept accounts my whole life," she said. "Just never on paper. Paper's a young woman's game." He didn't understand that. She didn't explain it. And all this time, you must remember, she believed she was getting away with something. She believed the house was Silas's own tidy nature, and that she had merely fallen into step with it. She did not know he had set the shelf at that height on purpose. She did not know he had squared the stove before her train ever left St. Louis. She thought she was a fraud who'd found, by luck, a house that hid her fraud. She thought the luck would run out any day. It was Hetty Vance who nearly ended it early. Hetty was the neighbor's wife, from the ranch 2 miles east, a broad, plain woman with a voice that carried over a full corral. She came calling one afternoon with a jar of preserves and a way of looking at a person that missed nothing. She sat at Adeline's clean table and watched Adeline pour the coffee, and she watched the way Adeline's fingers touched the rim of the cup first, quick, to find where it stood, before she filled it. Hetty said nothing about it that day. But she came back. And she watched again, and the third time she came, she found Adeline in the front room, where Silas kept a few of Caroline's things still, the dead wife's things, moved now into a low drawer, out of the way. Adeline had opened the drawer that morning, not to pry, only cleaning, and her hands had found them. The hair combs. A little glass bird, cool and smooth, a daguerreotype in a case that she held right up to her face and still could not make into a picture. "That's Caroline," Hetty said from the doorway, and Adeline startled. "I wasn't. I know you weren't." Hetty came in and sat. She was a good woman, not a soft one. Good. She was quiet a moment. "You know how she was, at the end? Silas doesn't speak of it." "No, he wouldn't." Hetty folded her hands. She went deaf the last 2 years. Fever took her hearing before it took the rest of her. Couldn't hear a word by the finish. Adeline held very still, and you'd never have known this house held a deaf woman. Hetty went on. You'd never have known. Because that man, and here her plain voice caught, just slightly, that man learned to talk with his hands, learned to stamp on the floorboard so she'd feel him come in and not be frighted. Built her a little rail by the porch step so she'd not miss it in the dark, since she couldn't hear her own footland. He never said a word about any of it, just did it. Just made her a house she could live in, and never once made her feel she was being carried. Adeline's hands had gone tight around the glass bird. "I only tell you," Hetty said, standing, brushing down her skirt, "because a woman ought to know what kind of man she's got. He's not a warm one to look at. He'll never make you a pretty speech. But you watch what his hands do, girl. That's where he keeps it all." And she left. And Adeline sat in the front room a long while, holding the little glass bird she could not see, and she thought, for the very first time, of the shelf at just her height, of the stove squared where her hand always found it, of the knot tied in the rope at the turn of the stairs that she'd taken for a fray, a nothing, a place the rope had simply knotted itself. A knot does not tie itself, but she pushed the thought down. She would not let herself have it. Because to believe it was to believe she was wanted, and she had spent her whole life not being wanted, and it was safer, always safer, to believe the thing that hurt less by being expected. The morning it all broke was an ordinary morning. There was frost on the glass. Silas had gone out early to the far pasture. Tom was mucking the barn, and Adeline came down to start the bread, and her foot, on the stair, misjudged. She'd have told you she knew that staircase by heart. 3 steps down, then the turn, then the rest. She'd have told you her feet had it memorized. But she was tired that morning, and her mind was on the yeast, and she took the turn a half step too soon. And her hand shot out for the rope and closed on nothing, because she'd misjudged that too, and she came down the last 3 steps hard, on her hip, on the kitchen floor. She wasn't badly hurt, but she was frightened, and being frightened made her clumsy, and she got herself up and reached for the tin shelf to steady herself and knocked the whole row of canisters off it, flour, salt, coffee, all of it, down onto the boards in a cloud and a clatter. And that was when the door opened. Silas, back early from the pasture. And behind him, of all the mornings in the world, Hetty Vance, come with her eggs. They saw it all, the white cloud of flour settling, Adeline on her knees in it, groping, and this was the thing she could not take back. Groping with her hands flat and searching across the floor for the fallen tins, her face lifted and turned wrong. Turned toward the window and not toward the mess, the way a person looks who is listening for a thing and not seeing it. Sweeping her open palms across the boards like a woman reading a page. For one long second, nobody spoke. And Adeline knew. She knew they had seen. She felt it the way you feel a cold draft find the back of your neck. The thing she had carried 900 miles, the thing she had folded down and sat on and hidden in tidy shelves and memorized figures. It was out, now, on the floor, in the flour, in plain daylight, in front of a witness. So she said it. Finally, she said it herself. Before they could, because that was the one dignity left to her. I'm going blind. Her voice was flat and steady and terrible. She got to her feet, flour on her skirt, and she faced the window because she could not face them. There, now it said. I've been going blind for 3 years, and I said nothing to you, Silas, not in 10 months of letters, and not on the platform, and not in this house. Because I wanted. Her voice broke, just once, and she mastered it, because I wanted a life that didn't end at the poorhouse, and I lied to get it, and I've been a fraud in your house since the day I stepped off the train. Silence, I'll pack, she said. You needn't say it. I'll be on the afternoon train. I'm sorry, Silas, you married a woman under false colors and you've every right to send her back. And she turned to go up the stairs, to the carpet bag, to the one bag she'd brought and would leave with, and Hetty Vance had a hand pressed to her own mouth, and Tom had appeared in the barn door white as a sheet, and it was into exactly that moment, that worst possible moment, that a rider came up the yard. Merritt Bond. Of the Longmere Stockman's Trust, in his good coat, with his leather folder under his arm, come to call a note due. He didn't dismount at first. He looked down at the tableau in the kitchen doorway, the flour, the frightened boy, the neighbor woman, the man saying nothing, and something in it pleased him, you could see it, the look of a household coming apart. A household coming apart pays its notes late. Warrick, he said, you'll know why I've come. The note, $640, and the 90 days are up in 3. I've ridden out to see how you stand. He let his eyes travel over the mess in the doorway. I can see how you stand. And there it was. Both blows in the same hour. The secret out, and the note called, and a woman already halfway up the stairs to leave. Silas Warrick had not said one word through any of it. He said one now. He said, wait. He wasn't talking to Bond. He crossed the kitchen through the flour, and he took Adeline's hand, the hand still stretched behind her toward the banister, and he did not say a speech, because he was not a man who had speeches. He turned her around, and he walked her back to the stairs. He put her fingers on the rope. He drew them up along it, slow, to the turn. And there, under her fingers, was the knot. The knot she'd taken for a fray. That's not a fray, he said. Quiet, just for her. I tied that. So you'd know the turn was coming. So your hand would feel it before your foot found the edge. Adeline stopped breathing. He moved her hand to the shelf. The tin shelf, empty now, its canisters on the floor. I set that at your reach, he said. Not mine. I stoop for it. It's your height, Adeline. It's been your height since before your train. And he took her 3 steps to the stove, and he laid her palm flat on the cool iron edge of it, square against the wall. And this, he said. I moved this, squared it to the wall so your hand would find the same corner every time and never the flame. I did all of it, before you came, in the 2 weeks I had. I did it with Tom's help, and I told him it was for tidiness, same as you told him. She was shaking now, the whole of her. How, was all she could say. How did your letters? And his voice, that flat, plain, unwarm voice, had something in it now that had never been in it out loud before. 10 letters. I've got them still. On the mantel. He drew a breath. The first one was a copperplate hand, fine as an engraving. By the 4th, the lines ran downhill off the right of the page, like water off a roof. By the 7th, your loops had opened up. You couldn't feel where the pen closed a letter anymore. In the 9th, there was a blot the size of my thumbnail where you'd set the pen down and lost the place, and it bled while you hunted. And the 10th? He stopped. The 10th, you'd dropped a word clean out of a sentence and gone back and written over the gap, and got it crooked, because you were writing a thing you could no longer read. Bond, on his horse, had gone very quiet. I laid them all in a row, Silas said, on that table, on a cold night before I sent your fare, and I read them like a man reads a track in mud. And I knew. No doctor. I just knew. A hand doesn't fail like that from carelessness. It fails from the eyes. Adeline's face was wet now. She wasn't hiding it. You knew, she whispered. You knew before I came. And you sent for me anyway. No. And here it came, the whole of it, the thing the story had been keeping. Not anyway. Listen to me. I did not send for you anyway. I sent for you because of it. She shook her head, not understanding. 10 months of letters, he said. 10 months. And you had every reason on this earth to stop writing me. Your hand was going. Every letter cost you more than the last. You could barely read my replies, you answered around the parts you couldn't make out, and I saw you do it, and I sent you a page of small print once just to be sure. And you answered every line but the small ones, and I knew. You could have quit. You could have spent it. Could have written me, I'm going blind, Silas, take pity. Take me in. You never did. Not once. You never once used the thing that was ruining you to buy an ounce of my pity. He took both her hands now. I've got a hired boy who works when I watch him. I've got a trust man on a horse in my yard who'd take my land for $600 and call it business. I didn't send fare across 900 miles for a pair of eyes. I've got eyes. I sent for the one soul in a year of my life who kept it honest while it was failing her, and asked me for nothing, and never once lied to me about anything that mattered, because the thing you called a lie, Adeline, that silence, that wasn't a lie to me. That was the bravest true thing I ever read. And then he said the sentence, the only one she'd carry the rest of her life. I did not send for a hand. I sent for the woman who kept it honest while it failed her. Stay. The kitchen was dead silent. Adeline stood with her fingers still on the cool square edge of the stove that he had moved for her before she ever knew his face, and the carpet bag was up the stairs half-packed, and it would stay half-packed forever, and she said one word. Stay? Stay, he said. And she set her weeping loose, not the weeping of shame. She'd done years of that alone. But the other kind, the kind that comes when a person finds out they were known all along. Known and wanted, known first and wanted because of it. She had crossed a continent certain she was hiding, and the man had seen straight through the ink into the whole of her before the train ever moved, and had built her a house to be safe in, and had said not a word, because to say it would have handed her a debt, and he was a man who would not put a debt on a woman who'd never once handed him one. She understood that too now. Why he'd stayed silent. It wasn't coldness. It was the deepest courtesy she'd ever been paid. He'd made her a home she could live in and let her think she'd earned it herself. Because he knew, of course he knew, that a proud woman would rather earn a thing than be given it. And into this, from the yard, came the voice of Merritt Bond. "This is all very fine," he said, though his own voice wasn't quite steady, "but sentiment doesn't service a note. $640, Warrick, 3 days. And I'll want to see books that a bank can read. Not a—" He gestured at the flour, the mess, the weeping. "Not a household in this condition." Silas turned to answer him, but Adeline stepped past him first. She wiped her face with the back of her floury hand, and she straightened her spine, and she walked out onto the porch toward the sound of the horse, 3 steps down that she took without a stumble now, and she faced the direction of Merritt Bond's voice. "You want the books, Mr. Bond," she said. "I'll give you the books. Ask me anything in them." Bond looked at her, then past her, at Silas, with something like contempt. "I'll want the ledger." "You'll want my head," Adeline said. "The ledger's badly kept. It always was. I keep it up here now." She touched her temple. "Ask me." Hetty Vance had come out onto the porch, and the 2 neighbor women who'd been passing on the road had stopped their wagon at the fence to see what the trust man wanted. The same women who'd stood on the depot platform months ago and watched a bride who wouldn't meet an eye and cluck to each other about it. They were watching now, too. Bond, humoring her, opened his leather folder. "Very well. The spring calf tally against the loss." 91 head born this spring, Adeline said, without a pause. 11 lost, 9 to the cold snap in the 2nd week of April, 2 to a bad calving. I brought one of them back from myself. 80 standing. Against the herd 2 years back, when the hard winter took a third, that's recovery of near 40% on the breeding stock in 2 seasons. You'll have that number in your own trust's own survey, Mr. Bond, if you kept it. Bond's mouth opened. Closed. "The feed cost," she went on, "was $212 over the winter, down from 3 years ago because we cut the far lot and drove them nearer the creek instead of hauling water. Silas's notion, a good one. The wire in April, $41. The note itself, $640, at the rate your trust wrote it, comes due in 3 days. And here," she reached into her apron pocket and drew out a folded paper she'd had Tom help her fold, "the season's sale receipts, here is $400 against it today, from the autumn beef, and the remaining $240 inside the 90 days as the terms allow, in full, on time, from a ranch that is standing, Mr. Bond, and married, and running, and answers every single figure you can put to it, which is more, I'd wager, than half the sighted men whose notes you hold can do." There was not a sound in the yard. Merritt Bond looked down at this woman, floury, red-eyed, who had just recited his own business back to him more accurately than his own folder held it, and who could not, he was slowly understanding, see his face at all. "You're," he started. "I'm the woman who keeps this ranch's books," Adeline said. "Now is the note serviced to the terms, or is it not?" A long moment. "It's serviced," Bond said. Stiffly, he closed his folder. "To the terms." He gathered his reins. He looked once at Silas Warrick and then at Adeline, and something in his face had shifted from contempt into a thing he'd never admit to. He turned his horse, and as he rode past the fence, past the 2 neighbor women in their stopped wagon, he said the only true thing he'd say all day, half to himself, dry as a ledger. "A married man keeps better books. I'll grant it." And he was gone down the road. Hetty Vance let out a breath like a woman who'd been holding it a year, and she looked at the 2 women at the fence, the very ones who'd whispered at the depot, and she said, loud enough to carry, loud enough to settle it for the whole valley for good, "She sees this place better blind than the rest of us do looking." And the women at the fence, who had come to see a household fall, drove on home with a different story, and told it, and the telling of it went round the valley the way stories do. And by the summer there was not a soul near Longmere who spoke of Silas Warrick's wife as anything but the sharpest head in the county, which she was. Now, 6 months on, it was spring again. Spring of 1888, and the front range gone green, and the calves new in the pasture, and the evenings come long and gold the way they do. And on the porch of the Warrick ranch, at dusk, a woman sat who moved through her house now without a hand ever put out to find the way. She knew every board of it. She knew the 3 steps down and the turn and the knot in the rope. Though she didn't need the knot anymore, her feet had the turn by heart, and the rope had worn smooth under all the times her fingers had brushed it, out of love now, and not out of need. She could see almost nothing at all these days. A shape of light at the window, the gold of the sun as a warmth on one cheek. The rest was gone, or nearly. And it did not frighten her the way it once had, because the house held her, and the man held her, and she had stopped, entirely stopped, believing she was a fraud in a home too good for her. She'd earned the home. And she'd been given it. And she'd learned, at last, that a body can be both at once, and that the giving is no shame. Silas came up onto the porch and sat beside her with the evening's mail in his hand. There was a letter from a cousin in Kansas and the seed catalog, and he read them to her, out loud, in that flat, plain voice, because she read by his voice now, and it suited them both fine. And on the mantel inside, where once a dead woman's combs and glass bird had sat, there was a bundle of letters tied in blue ribbon. 10 of them. Her own. The copperplate first page, and the blotted last one, and all the downhill ones between, the letters that had told him everything before she ever meant to. He'd kept every one, and now, some evenings, they took them down and he read them to her. Her own words in her own failing hand, and she'd laugh at the bad spots, and he'd trace with his finger the drift he'd read months ago on a cold night at the table. And the thing that had once been her deepest secret sat now on the table between them, read aloud, warm, no secret at all. The very thing that had shaken and failed and given her away, and by giving her away, brought her home. She still wrote. Of course she still wrote. Every evening, when the house was quiet, she'd sit at the little table and move a pen across a page she couldn't see, forming the words out of memory, out of 40 years of an evening hand. She couldn't read them back. Neither could he, half the time. It didn't matter. He kept them all the same. He tied them with the others. Because a hand that shook had told that man more than a fine one ever could. It told him who she was when she thought no one was reading. And he'd read it. And he'd known her. And he'd sent 900 miles for her, not despite the failing, but because of what the failing had shown him could not fail, the honest heart behind the shaking hand. 2 pairs of hands is what builds a life, one of them going blind, and the other one knowing it, and reaching anyway. If you've got a person in your life who saw straight through to the truth of you, and stayed, reached for you because of what they saw, not despite it, then you already understand this story better than any words of mine can tell it. Comment the town you're watching from tonight. I'd like to see how far a story like this one travels.